The match that I want to focus on with Polt is the round of 4 at IEM Katowice, where he plays Nerchio in the semifinals. And I want to characterize some of the unique things that Polt does as a player that you don't see a lot of other Terran players doing, and I'm also going to show some things that a lot of other top Terrans in the world do, like Polt. So, at the beginning of the game, there's nothing too crazy going on. Polt is going to go for a Reaper expand. And he's going to go ahead and he's going to send his Reaper to the closest side to him. And he's going to see the Zerg. So the thing that I want to show here is that when your Reaper gets to the Zerg's base and the hatchery isn't done, and luckily Polt gets there to see this timing, he could have also clicked on the gas to find out how much gas was being mined. It could already tell that it's pretty early for what's going on for the Zerg. So what's probably happening right now is there's an early ling run by happening. I think Polt has realized this, and you're actually about to see this pop up here in a second. He's sending his Reaper back home because he knows what's going to be happening. He kind of already knew that these lings were coming, and he's going to deal with them pretty appropriately. Doesn't lose any SCVs, doesn't fall under the pressure, and deals with the lings just, pretty easily. Now, so far, this is pretty standard of what you would see most Terrans doing right now. You would be going for reactored Hellions, following it up with some sort of starport. But this right here is the where his build starts to deviate from most Terrans. Right now, he's starting to get 2 Marines at a time and is going to get a tech lab on the factory. Now, it has been somewhat of a common build to open up tanks, but it's starting to become a little bit more popular. But Polt is really one of the only Terrans that I'm seeing that has been doing this build. Most Terrans end up opening Hellions, and a lot of the times Polt does go for Hellions, but this game he's going to go for for a tank. And it's versus Nerchio too, so this makes a lot of sense too if you think about the matchup between the two players. But Polt comes in, sees that there's an early third base happening, and this is going to influence what Polt's going to do with the tech that he has out currently. So right now in the production tab you can see that he has a tank on the way. He doesn't really look at his production very often. If you notice, right now what he's looking at is what SCV count he's at with his orbital command. And he always queues at around 2 SCVs at a time, as you can see right now. He's also keeping track, right now he's not queuing them up, but he's keeping track of his 2 command centers and when the SCVs are going to be built. And this is something that a lot of good Terran players do. They hardly ever go back and look at their main base. They're usually very proactive out on the map unless they have to build something. So right now he's trying to get scouting information that he can. He's going to go ahead and swap out the factory and put down 2 barracks. This is a pretty common follow-up that you see a lot of Terrans doing. Now, he did scout out that there's Roach Horn and there's 3 bases. So even though the Zerg's on 3 bases, there can still be a potential all-in on the way. One thing that I have noticed that Polt did do in some of his previous games is he did a Marine drop. But in this case, he's going to go for a tank drop. Now, something that you'll see a lot of good Terrans do, like Polt, is that whatever they have out at that time, like a medevac, a tank, anything that can be used out on the map, that's what they're going to do. And a lot of the best Terran players in the world do this. So he's out on the map, very active, while macroing at home. And the whole idea behind this is to keep the Zerg at home, opposed to attacking the Terran, and also to punish a greedy Zerg as well. So the whole objective here for Polt is to just be a nuisance. And the one thing that Polt does too that a whole lot of other Terrans don't do is he gets an early Viking out to go ahead and deal with some of the overlords out on the map. So right now, this is some vision control that Polt is trying to gain. For one, something that he's going to do later in the game is doing a lot of drops. It's going to allow him to do that. It's going to make Nerchio a little bit more scared to put his overlords out on the map, especially since he's not going to be going Nitas this game. So right now, Polt is following this up with 3 barracks into a 3rd CC. This is probably one of the most standard ways to follow up something what Polt is doing. I would say something that's a little bit unordinary to see for the most part is going for tank drops, since they don't really get a whole lot done in the early game except for put some map presence out on the map and be just a little annoying. Now this is the part where I think Polt does that a lot of other Terrans don't do at the moment. That is very interesting to me. He's getting 2 medevacs out. We'll talk about that in a second. He's going to drop these Marines with this tank, and that's the thing that I think is really interesting that he does. He's followed up 2 EBs before he gets his 4th and 5th rack. So for the most part, he's playing pretty greedy, but considering what the Zerg is doing, the Zerg is kind of playing the same way. He's got 3 bases. If there was some sort of timing attack, it would have already hit Polt by now. So Polt knows he's pretty safe. Something also to mention too, those speedlings didn't have speed, or I mean those lings didn't have speed on them. So this kind of indicates to Polt what the army composition out of Nerchio is going to be. So right here we have Polt getting ready to do his medevac timing here. He also has stim on the way, almost done for this timing thing. So this right here is the first real big timing that we're going to see out of Polt, and something that you can see that Polt has practiced a lot since they're both lining up about the same time.
Research.
So right now he's going to follow up with the 4th and 5th racks. And the thing that I want to continue to say is that Polt is out on the map when he has the units to be out on the map. So he has stim and he has his 2 medevacs out. A lot of other players, maybe that aren't professionals, would be back at home right now, not really applying that pressure, allowing the Zerg to be a lot more greedy. What this is going to allow Polt to do is put map pressure out on the map and force his opponent to make units opposed to making a lot of economy, which is what Zerg wants to do. So this follow-up out of Polt is pretty unique, and I think this kind of catches Nerchio out of kind of surprised here. This is a pretty interesting timing tech that you don't see very many Terrans doing, and I think this is going to be a build that's going to start to get a little bit more popular. I think this build deals with what Nerchio is doing very well. So again, this is just to apply pressure. This is just to make sure that Nerchio isn't being too greedy, keeping him honest. Still applying that pressure. I mean, he's doing a good amount of damage to all these roaches. Still putting a lot of map pressure on, and is continuing to build units and is going to get his 3rd base. So all this pressure is allowing him to take his 3rd base pretty safely. Trying to keep the Zerg aware and staying at home. So this is one of the dull moments in the game where Polt isn't actually really doing a whole lot, but he is taking his 3rd base. He's just pressuring, trying to take map control right now. He's taking control of the towers. And one thing that Polt really likes to do is keeping pressure on the map when he can. So even though he went back home and retreated, he's going to send something up top like the Liberator to put pressure on. Meanwhile, while this is happening with the Liberator, he's going to be pushing with his army down to the 3rd. Now that's something very important to keep in mind here. If we look at the minimap, he has some sort of pressure that's coming up to the main base, where the yellow that I'm drawing in right now. Polt at the same time is going to be attacking at the 3rd base. He might even go for the 4th base if it's there, but the whole point of this is to put the Zerg in a position of where he has to decide, do I defend one place, defend both, how am I going to do that? It's going to put a lot more pressure on Nerchio than it is for Polt to decide whether or not he needs to do that. Same thing, he's bringing Marines over here, so he has some sort of pressure going on up top. Polt is going to go ahead and put some pressure on the 3rd base while this is going on. And this is forcing Nerchio to be at 2 places at once and react to 2 places at once. He also has a Liberator at the bottom of the map. So Polt is effectively at 3 places at once on the map, and this is something that Polt excels at, and something he's always been good at, even in Heart of the Swarm, is putting the enemy in a spot to go, deciding where they need to go on the map. Now, Nerchio is probably one of the better Zergs in Europe, so he's not going to falter some of this stuff. But versus most other Zergs, they do end up falling behind in his other games in IEM. But Nerchio does deal with all this very well. And meanwhile, one thing that's really important to point out is that Polt is also rallying all his army back at home, just in case there is some sort of run-by, something that goes on. Who knows? It could be anything. So he's just being cautious, making sure he has some sort of army supply back at home to deal with whatever comes, because that is something that's very popular for Zergs to do and have counterattacks. So this is the first time Polt's been pushed back in this game and has to retreat a little bit, and ends up losing 2 tanks to fungals. Something to keep in mind while this is happening is he still has a marine drop going on in the back. He doesn't really have the Liberator anymore, but right now he has a drop going on in the main base of the Nerchio is caught out in the map and is now going to have to deal with this drop, and ended up sending some roaches back home to deal with this. And look what he had to do with his drone. So he's missing some mining time in his base, and in some missing mining time for minerals and for gas. And then Polt keeps his drops alive. This is another thing that Polt does really well, is keeping his drops alive and making sure that he's just constantly putting pressure on, keeping the Zerg at home. And what is he doing? He has a drop up at the main base, doing like I was talking about earlier. He knows that the Zerg has a 4th base on the way. He's dropping the main, so he's going to go ahead and send these 2 medevacs, and they're going to go down to the 4th base. So this is going to create a lot of map pressure for Polt while he goes ahead and just builds up back at home. Polt does get supply blocked a couple times, but that is just due to him playing very aggressive and being very active out in the map. And one thing to note here is that this is 9:44 in the game, and that this is how much is going out in the map right now. He has 2-2 on the way. It's ahead of the Zerg. This could probably be attributed to the fact that Polt's been putting a lot of map pressure for the Zerg to be dealing with. So he's trying to keep that drop in the main base alive. One thing that Polt did do is that he pulled this back, right-clicked a couple times, and then sent it back in, so it would queue in before he even... so then he wouldn't have to do it again. He ends up losing it, but that's okay. He's going to go ahead and send a drop back up to the main base. So he's consistently trying to keep pressure on 2 sides of the map almost all game, and trying to do some sort of pressure in the middle of the map. To most other Zergs, this would probably be where they would falter, since this is a lot of multitasking to keep up with. But since it is Nerchio, and like I said, he is one of the top Zergs in Europe, he's keeping it pretty nicely with all this aggression. But look at all the pressure that Polt is putting out in the map. He's dictating the pace of the game. There was only one part of the game where Zerg was starting to push back Polt, but Polt still even has drops going on in the main base. And he's killed a total of 11 workers this game. And he's just continuing to put all this pressure out in the map. He has his 3rd bases up. He's just producing when he can. He's going to have 2-2 done pretty soon here. And it's just applying a lot of pressure. So one thing to also notice is that Polt has been pretty effective with a lot of this pressure, and putting, as you can see with the units lost tab, he's basically trading a little bit better than the Zerg is in most of these fights. Ultras are out, Polt sees this, and one of the very interesting things that I thought when I was watching this replay is that he's starting to get Thors. You don't see very many Terrans going Thors, and he's going Mass Marines. And it's pretty interesting because one of your initial reactions to Thors is to be getting a lot of Liberators and a lot of Marauders. At least that's what a lot of Terrans have been doing. The dropping that Polt's been doing has been pretty common for some Korean Terrans, and something that a lot of the best Terrans in the world have been doing. But one of the things I haven't noticed other Terrans do that Polt does is getting these Thors. He is starting to get a couple Marauders right now if you look at the production tab, so He does start to get, but he isn't getting as many Marauders as a lot of Terrans would probably want to get or like to get. So again, just applying this pressure. He has some drops out in the map. So this is one of the key points in the game that I think Polt, one of the reasons why Polt wins the game here. And we're going to see here in a second. He does a double drop in the main. He's focusing the top and bottom of the map for the Zerg, forcing 2 spots at once. And meanwhile, Nerchio is actually out in the map because this is one of Nerchio's peaks in the game where he could probably win it right off the bat. I mean, he does have a pretty scary army. The Ultras are really tanky, very hard to deal with. I mean, he has a lot of Infestors. So this is going to be very hard for Polt to defend. But Polt right now has 2 drops out in the map, and this is one of the reasons why Zergs are very try to stay very passive for the most part, since this is what could happen at them. So right now, the Polt sees that this is coming at him for this attack. Nerchio, basically, when he sees these drops, is going to be put into basically an all-in situation where he's going to have to kill Polt. This looks like a very good fight for Nerchio, but one thing to keep in mind that the army supply is still in the favor of Polt right now. A lot of people that are watching the game right now, maybe in the live broadcast, probably thought that this game is over, but this game is pretty far from over. He has 2 drops at 2 different places. He has about the same army supply, and both of them are basically trading the economy. And Polt started getting the Liberators out once he started seeing the Ultras. And he has these 2 Liberators out. He probably could have lifted up the supply depots. But his priority right now is trying to get the Zerg's bases right now. And a base trade for Terran is typically more favorable for the Terran since you can lift up your buildings. It's a lot easier to wall off your main base. It's hard for the Zerg to get in there. So right now, the Terran is trading pretty good right now. The one thing that Nerchio did do is attack into a upgrade advantage for Polt. And this might be a tribute to, like I said, him having a lot of map pressure and stuff in the early game. But Polt has defended this pretty well. He's got 2 drops on the side of the map. And these drops right here are what won him the game. If he didn't do these 2 drops, most Terrans probably would have lost this game. But because of these 2 drops, this didn't allow Nerchio to have the income to reinforce his army. It put Nerchio in an all-in position because he had to get into the main base of the Terran and get on top of the production to try to win. And something that's very interesting out of Polt's side of things is he got 2 Thors. And like I said, you don't see that very often for Terran players. You normally see a lot of Liberators, but he ends up going for a lot of Thors, and he goes for a large amount of Marines, more so than Marauders. Even versus the Roach Ravager combo, he was going for a lot more Marines than Marauders. But as you can see, Polt has a very unique, different style to Zerg, but one thing that continues to be the theme of Polt is that he puts a lot of map pressure on for his opponents. He drops 2 places at once, and sometimes he'll even be on the map 3 places at once, forcing his opponent to be at 3 places while macroing pretty nicely to set him up for the mid to late game, just like this. This is one of the reasons why Polt is one of the best Terrans in the world. And this is what most of the best Terrans in the world do is be very active on the map with their drops when they can be, following up these attacks with timings, just like the tank drop comes in, does a stim marine timing. So Polt has a lot of different timings that he does, and it's very interesting to watch, and it's very unique. And I think some of these builds out of Polt and a lot of these playstyles are going to be used a lot more often. And I think that the way that Polt played this game is kind of how you should be playing versus this style versus Zerg. Thank you for watching, and that's episode 1 of The Art of Terran featuring Polt.